Hello, and welcome to this National Tutors Functional Skills English Level 1 course. My name is Sarah, and I will be your tutor for this 30-lesson series. Before we get started with our first lesson, may I take this opportunity to remind you that these are the books and resources that I highly recommend you get your hands on to accompany your studies for this course. They will all complement the different lessons we will be going through together and also give you opportunities to practice the skills that you learn. All of the information can also be found in the course description on the National Tutors website. So, lesson 1. We are going to be looking at the purpose of different texts. What does that mean, the purpose of different texts? Well, the purpose very much depends on the content and the intended audience of the text. But generally speaking, texts fall into one of the following 6 categories: to inform, to persuade, to entertain, to instruct, to describe, or to express feelings. We will be looking at examples of all of these today. That will include news articles, advertisements, short stories, recipes, travel blogs, and personal diaries. Before we get started with the first one, may I just draw your attention to this acronym, TALC. As we go through every example today, I would like you to think about and keep in mind the following questions. Think about the intended audience. Who is the text likely written for? What or who did the writer have in mind when writing the text? Analyze the content. What information is presented and how is it presented? Are facts or opinions given? Is a story being told? Why do you think it's been presented in this fashion? Look at the structure. Is the text organized with clear steps? Is there a logical argument being stated? Or is there more of a narrative flow to a story? Consider the language used. Is the tone formal or informal? Is the language persuasive, argumentative, humorous? Keep all of these in mind as we go through our lesson today, but there will also be prompts on every page. So, informative text. Our first example here is a news article. So please pause the video here and take the opportunity to read the report through thoroughly before having a look at the questions on the left. So, what initial things did you notice about this article? You might have been drawn to the bold headline, "Help Floods into Deluged School." Now, I noticed that there was a pun involved here. Help floods into, as in help rushes to the school, but they've used the word floods deliberately here because the story is about an actual weather event that caused a flood. Very, very clever headline there, something that's very catchy and draws the reader's eye. You may also notice that this is a local news article, and you can see at the subheading here at the top, if I may just highlight it here, that this took place in Westwater-on-Sea. Other things I can see here is that it's organised into clear paragraphs. Now, usually with paragraphs, each one talks about a specific event or a specific aspect of a situation. As you read, you might have noticed that the paragraphs talked about the events in different stages, featured different quotes from different people who were involved, etc. And last but not least, quite clearly there's a picture there giving us a visual aid and a hint as to what the story may well be about. So we can see the flooded school in the background there, severely flooded, and also a smaller picture in the top left-hand corner here of what looks to be part of the playground area. So, 3 pieces of important information. So, important for a news article, what do you think those might be? It may be the headline, as we've already discussed, where the event took place, who was involved, what were the consequences of these events, etc. So the first thing that we've already pointed out here is that it happened in Westwater-on-Sea. The second thing I noticed is that one of the first people to be quoted here is the head teacher of the school, and she recounts how she was woken at 3:30 in the morning to be told that her school was flooding. Ask yourself, why do you think the article started with this detail? It's quite dramatic. It gives a sense of urgency, and a little bit of shock value as well. It puts the reader in the head teacher's shoes, making them think about what it must have been like to receive such a shocking phone call in the early hours of the morning. So it grabs the reader's attention and makes them want to read further. That's very important for a news article because it's all about getting people to read so they can keep selling newspapers. We can then see in the second paragraph, it moves on to telling us more about how this happened. How did this flood occur? We can see that due to high tides and strong onshore winds and a torrent of torrential rain, quoted, that's why in this case this flood occurred. So we've started with a first-hand account and then we've moved on to a description of why this actually ended up occurring. You'll notice as you read on through the rest of the text that the information here is obviously factual, clear, not repetitive, telling people what they need to know in a very straightforward, concise manner. That's also very important for a news article. If too many facts are repeated or the details become vague and uninteresting, readers are going to disengage. So one of the features you can almost always guarantee you'll find in a news article is short, snappy facts that get to the point quickly. Keep the reader engaged. One thing I do like about this article in particular is that it gives the opinion of a couple of students, Ahmed from year 6 and Sophia from year 4. Now they both have quite opposing viewpoints, which I think is actually very clever of the reporter because it's showing that there are different perspectives, both from staff and from students. And then finally, the last paragraph talks about how the community has rallied around the school to support them in recovering from this weather event. It ends with quite a comforting note and a description of plans for the school to avoid this type of situation in the future. So you can see it's got a very clear beginning, middle and end. Description of what happened, why, what the aftermath was, and how they're going to fix the problem. Clear, concise, and to the point. So, do you think the picture plays an important role in this article? Because we won't always find pictures in news articles, especially those that are short. In this instance, I think the picture's quite striking and gives the reader a very clear idea of how severe the flooding was. So we've already talked about the structural features of paragraphs already. We've looked at the headline and the subheading. The way the writing is organised is in columns, which is fairly traditional for newspapers. It gives the illusion that the sentences are shorter, and so the reader doesn't feel overwhelmed by lots of writing to read. Makes it easy to digest and ordered and easy to follow. another important aspect of a news article. Finally, is the tone of the article formal or informal? By formal, I mean using the kinds of words you would find in a public arena, such as a newspaper, a flyer, a brochure, anything that's designed to be read by multiple people rather than one specific person. The writing is formal because not only is the situation a serious one that's being reported on, and writing informally about this could give the illusion that the reporter doesn't care deeply about the situation, but it's appropriate when the writing or the text is designed for a large audience. Generally speaking, the tone is formal, and as a newspaper they want to be taken seriously, and so a formal tone will always be used. Okay, let's move on to example number 2 of informative text. Here you can see this time we have a timeline of the evolution of internet and technology. So again, pause the video so you can familiarize yourself with the timeline. So what features can we notice this time? Well, first thing I'll say is that I noticed a pop of color, again designed to catch the eye. We've got graphics involved this time rather than pictures. And we can see that the structure is very clear and ordered to make it easier for the reader to understand the process of the evolution of technology from 1991 to 2020. So, can you identify 3 pieces of information that you would class as important from this example? The first one for me would be the title itself, the evolution of the internet and technology. That's telling us very plain and simply what this is going to be telling us. And then we've got something of a subheading here, a general overview of the way the internet grew and how technology was shaped. Now, general overview here, this is what I want to draw your attention to. This is not claiming to be specific and accurate down to the day. This is a general overview of how technology evolved over a span of 30 years. So that's very important, almost like a disclaimer to ensure the readers understand that this isn't going to be accurate down to the day or the month or with specific dates in mind, but just by the general years to show the progression of technology. And thirdly, I can see that each graphic that's matched with each box along the timeline is easy to reference because the name that graphic represents, or the brand that graphic represents, is deliberately placed in bold in the box so we know which type of tech is being spoken about in each box, along with a brief description. All of these aspects make the timeline nice and easy to understand. So do you think the graphics play an important role then? I do wonder if the graphics weren't there, I don't know if I'd be lost. I think I'd still understand, but I think it would make it a little less pleasing to the eye. The graphics definitely break up the writing nicely, make it a bit more, I'd say, user-friendly and relatable. We all have smartphones in our pockets these days, and so a lot of these graphics and symbols will be familiar to us. And if you were searching for a timeline on technology and the progression, you might be more inclined to click on this one because it involves graphics and color. So again, just like the newspaper article, this has been designed specifically to catch the reader's eye. So structure we've talked about a little bit already, but fairly obviously it's laid out in a vertical pattern according to the time on the timeline it is being referenced to, nice and clearly. You'll notice that each section, so if I may draw your attention to, for example, iTunes, most of us are familiar with this. They've not just written the short paragraph about Apple and left it at that. They have outlined it with a yellow box that corresponds to the color at the top of the timeline and put a shadow box behind it to make it really jump out from the page and make sure it's nice and clear. And they've also used arrows to point to the correct date. So that, I think, is a very important structural component here. And finally, once again, is the tone of the text formal or informal? Again, here I'd say it's formal, but it's also very matter of fact. It's very factual. It's just getting to the point, telling us what each step on the technology timeline looked like. So that was informative text. Next, we're going to move on to persuasive text. So this style of text is designed to convince the reader to adopt a particular point of view or make a specific decision, like you would find in an advertisement, a political speech, or an opinion piece. For example one, as you can see, I have chosen an advertisement, a billboard advertisement. So, once again, pause the video for as long as you need just to familiarise yourself with the picture. What is this billboard advertising? What features specifically gave you a clue? Now, I chose this advert because I think it's very, very clever, because it looks like someone has almost pasted this around an existing advert. It looks like almost a bucket of maybe KFC, and we know that the slogan for that is finger licking good. And someone's deliberately pasted over the top an advert for green cuisine, which I'm sure you would have guessed by now is a plant-based alternative to chicken nuggets. Now, why is this clever marketing? Well, the way it's been placed on, like someone's quickly slapped it over to hide the chicken to convince people to try plant-based alternatives, is a physical metaphor for green cuisine being designed to replace meat, or at least some of the meat on people's plates. You'll notice that the green colours in the picture mirror the name, even the man's trousers, actually. I'm not sure if that was deliberate or not, but it's a nice coincidence if it wasn't. The green in the advert mirror the name of the product, which is also very clever. So what else about the billboard, catch is your eye? I think the slogan is also very clever. We already discussed that it looks like a KFC advert is behind it, and the slogan. But here, for green cuisine, they've said it doesn't have to be chicken to make you want to lick your fingers, which is a direct reference to KFC itself. Very, very clever marketing as a competitor of meat-based fast food. It's saying to the consumer that our product is just as good as fried chicken and you will enjoy it as much as you do fried chicken. Give it a try. So let's have a look at the graphics then. Do you think they play a role, an important role in this advert? I'd definitely say so. The image of the chicken dipper, or say non-chicken dipper, being dipped in this sauce does look delicious. If anyone like me is partial to a chicken nugget, it looks very, very tasty, and again makes the product look irresistible and like something that most people would want to try. It's also a very familiar shape, looks like a chicken nugget, so something that wouldn't be so intimidating if you weren't used to eating plant-based. There's also a picture of the product in its box, so you know what to look for on the shelf in the supermarket. Again, making it short, snappy to the point, just as we saw in informative text, but much less text than we saw in the news article, for example, getting the message across in very few words. And that's why graphics are so important in advertising. So unlike our first two examples, the writing here is, I wouldn't say very informal, but it's definitely less formal than the news article or the timeline we've already looked at. It's certainly more personable. It's talking directly to any consumer reading it. And it makes the product sound very, very tempting. So all in all, a very effective advertisement. The next example we're going to look at is a persuasive speech. So please, again, pause the video to read the speech in your own time and then have a look at the questions when you're ready. Now, this is just an extract of part of a speech, but there's enough there for you to get the idea of what's being talked about. So first of all, what is the speech about? This speech is about the value of education and why we should not only invest in it, both financially and emotionally, but also why parents and teachers should be encouraging students to understand how important education is. So can you identify 3 pieces of information here that the writer is communicating to their audience? So first of all, I do notice that this is clearly a speech being given by a student to teachers and their peers, possibly at some kind of awards ceremony or special meeting for parents and teachers. Second of all, the second paragraph tells me what they're going to be talking about and why, the importance of education, and why this writer thinks the importance of education should be highlighted. They then move on to using a proverb in their writing, education is the key to success. But they go on to state that this doesn't just refer to money and acquiring wealth, that education is valuable within itself, that knowledge should be valued just as money is valued. And then they touch on a very interesting point in the 4th paragraph, where they say that colleges and classrooms aren't the only places where learning takes place, that every experience and encounter that we go through every day help our brains to develop in a positive or a negative way, which is absolutely true. And perhaps this writer is encouraging the listeners for this speech to really think about their interactions and other experiences outside of their classroom and whether it's contributing to a good or bad learning experience. So secondly, what persuasive language can you identify in this article and why is it effective? Well, firstly, I can spot the word importance. The importance of education is helping us survive in this world is something that everyone tells me. Both 2 keywords there that really speak to the human experience. And actually, the word importance is repeated a couple of more times in this paragraph alone. Really bringing it home, and repetitiveness, is a technique you will often see utilized in persuasive text. They then touch on how a good or a bad education will go on to affect you in all areas of your life. And they use the interesting analogy of it's similar to having a brain but not learning how to use it. This has a similar effect as a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is one that is asked that's not necessarily designed to be answered, but more to make somebody think. And this statement here, similar to having a brain but not learning how to use it, would make the audience stop and think, oh, that's a very good point. Part of persuasive speech and why it's so effective is getting your audience to reflect on what you're talking about, making it personable. Another example of how this writer has made it relatable is this sentence here: the brain of an individual does not have a stop learning button. And they're absolutely correct. Every experience we go through from birth until death, whether good or bad, does impact how we perceive the world, how we interact with the world, and what we learn about the world. So structurally, this is very straightforward. We have our title at the top. Now, in this case, it just says persuasive speech because this is just an example I found. But normally you'd have the title of the speech, perhaps who's speaking, the day that the speech is being given, and who the audience are who are being addressed. And then secondly, sentences and paragraphs. Paragraphs that organize the speaker's thoughts nice and clearly, helping them to not only follow their own train of thought, but make sure that the message that they are delivering to their audience is clear and easy to follow. Finally, the tone, fairly obviously, is formal. They are addressing a large group of people and want to make sure that the language used is appropriate and correct for the context. They're not just chatting to a friend at a cafe or over text. This is a formal piece of writing. Okay, number 3, entertaining text. So text designed to entertain. This simply means that these texts are designed to provide enjoyment and amusement. Entertaining text can be for all ages. In our first example, you can see this is from a children's book. So start by just familiarizing yourself with the page. Now, this is just one page from a children's book rather than the full story, but it's just enough to give you an idea of what you can expect to see. So firstly, what do we notice? Well, a large part of the page is taken up by a beautiful illustration. As this book is designed for children, this is a key component in keeping the children engaged. Stories for children, particularly young children, although this could be targeted at maybe a 7 to 8-year-old. The story involves pictures to help keep the children engaged and follow the order of the dialogue. Now, by dialogue, I mean speech or spoken word here. Now, we can see in this page the bear and the donkey are having a conversation about who is going to look after the bear's children. So in the picture, the illustrator has drawn the bear making a gesture as if in the middle of conversation, and the donkey is facing the bear in a form of reply, lining up with what is being said on the page. Structurally, what's important to note is that whenever there is a new person speaking, so obviously this is just between two characters here, but whenever a new person starts to speak, a new line is started on the page. This is a similar formatting tool that's used when we are separating a text by paragraphs. A new idea begins a new paragraph. A new speaker begins a new line of text. This helps whoever is reading the book, either a child or an adult, understand who is speaking, especially if you want to do voices for young children, but also allows the speech not to be lost or read into each other. So we know already this text is designed for children, either read to them or read by them independently. Next, what is it about how the page is designed that helps us to understand that this is for entertainment purposes? It's not an instruction manual, it's not an advertisement, it's for entertainment purposes. It's to be read and enjoyed. Well, there's bright colours, there's whimsical characters, and tone, most importantly, is quite informal. The tone's clear, the writing and the language used is very clear, but it's informal. Two people having a conversation. Do you feel the story, or of what we can see of it, would be as effective if there weren't any pictures there? Considering the age group that this is likely targeted at, I don't think it would be nearly as popular or as inviting for children if there were no pictures there. Now, we know that books that are designed for perhaps teenagers or adults often don't feature pictures, or many pictures certainly. And that's because it's understood that the person reading the books are more interested in reading and don't necessarily need pictures to help them follow the story or the text. But we know children respond to bright colours, whimsical characters, and especially if they're young, these pictures provide and act as a prompt for the different stages of the story. So if it's read on a regular basis, they're able to recognise, oh, that page, bear and donkey are having a discussion. I recognise the picture. So even if children can't read for themselves yet, they're able to follow the story through the images they remember. And then lastly, most of this page is speech. Either the bear is speaking or the donkey is speaking. This is what we would call first person. We are hearing directly from either character. If this was written in third person, the narrator would be describing what both characters were saying. Donkey said this, bear said this, then donkey said that, then bear followed next. Do you think having the direct speech, the first person perspective here, makes it more interesting for the reader? I think so. I think it gives a nicer rhythm to this piece of writing, more natural back and forth, like you would have a normal conversation. Plus, this could well help children develop their own conversational skills, learn how to ask questions and how to respond appropriately. Much more descriptive and in-depth than if someone was just describing the conversation. Our second example of entertaining text is a limerick, one of my favourite styles of poems. So once again, pause the video and familiarise yourself with the poetry on the right, and then we will look at the questions on the left. Okay, so I hope some of those made you chuckle. They certainly did me. So limericks, as you can see, are very clever. They often make you laugh, and they're not always essentially true. They're designed to be humorous. They're designed to be a little bit nonsensical. And it's more about the humorous rhymes than anything else. So I think it's safe to say that one of the aspects that indicates that this text is designed to be entertaining is that it's just funny. A lot of what's in these 5 separate limericks doesn't really make much sense, but it's funny, it's creative, it's engaging, and it's really quite clever. Now, limericks follow what we call a repetitive syllabic pattern. You may have noticed already that the first, second, and last lines have 8 syllables. There was an old man with a nose. It waters the street like a hose. 8 syllables. But the third and fourth lines only have 5 syllables. Generally speaking, some of these have more. But 88558 is a typical syllabic pattern for a limerick. So there's a regular rhythm to a limerick, which makes it a little bit song-like, which is what also makes them catchy. The great thing about songs is that it follows a rhythm, a melody, which makes the words easy to remember. And a limerick follows a similar structure. You could, if you wanted to, put a tune to a limerick because of the rhythmic pattern it follows. There are lots of famous limericks I've heard in the past, most of which are rude, so I shall not repeat them, but I'm sure if you wanted to, you could look them up online. And many people know them by heart because of the rhythm, because of the rhyming. Again, both could be comparisons made to songs. A regular rhythm, rhyming words, and memorable, funny themes as well. When something is amusing, when something makes us laugh, we do tend to remember those things. So a funny limerick, a catchy song on the radio, a story that makes us laugh or brings any kind of intense emotion is going to help us remember it. And that's why entertaining text is so clever. It has to really not just capture the audience, but help them to remember what has been said long after the experience is over. Okay, so we are halfway through our list now. So if you'd like to pause the video, get a drink, a snack, a stretch, whatever you need, please do so. We've got 3 more to go through. So fourth on our list is instructional text. Now, these style of texts guide readers through a process or task, usually in order. You might find these in manuals, recipes, or how-to guides. Now, as you can see for our first example, I have chosen a recipe for a Canadian apple pie, which sounds absolutely delicious. So once again, pause the video just to familiarize yourself with the video on the right, and then we will go through the questions on the left. So I've just realized that I gave the answer to the first question away, but it was fairly obvious. Canadian apple pie is what we would be making if we were following this recipe. Structural features. Well, there's loads here. So first of all, we have our lovely bold title here in green. And then secondly, we have our list of ingredients, beautifully laid out with clear bullet points, each with their own unit of measurement for accurate, well, measuring. Next, we have our directions, clearly separated by nice green boxes that correspond to the green of our title, which is a nice way to link it all together. And of course, numbered as well in a step-by-step fashion. And finally, a helpful little infographic at the top here, the cooking time and how many calories. I don't know if that is per slice or for the whole thing, but still helpful nonetheless. So our bullet points for our ingredients obviously are very helpful in making this nice and clear and easy to follow, especially if you were a first-time baker and this was your first attempt. You wouldn't have any trouble following the list of ingredients and how much of each ingredient you required. The directions are also very straightforward, just 4 steps. I will say one critique I guess I have for this set of instructions is that it's assuming that a pie crust has already been made. You may find in other recipes separate directions for making the pie crust or a little disclaimer perhaps underneath the title here to say this requires a pre-made pie crust. Perhaps that's me being finicky, but in the interest of being clear and straightforward, which instructional text should be, that would be something that potentially could improve this set of instructions. So what do we think of the graphics and the colours here? Do you think it adds to the appealing nature of the recipe? I think it does. Not only does it draw the reader's eye straight to the page, but there are helpful graphics referring to every ingredient required for our recipe, which again may be very helpful if you are not a seasoned baker. The picture on the top right hand side there of the finished pie with a pot of coffee and a jug of milk and some spring flowers, all very appealing visuals there, making it look like a delicious recipe that you would want to follow, encouraging the reader to have a go at this recipe. Now, in instructional text, you've likely already noticed that the tone again is very informal. Why do we think formal tone is important for instructional text, and specifically in this example? Well, if someone were to speak informally, use slang, or perhaps not speak in whole sentences, or avoid using technical language like whisk, preheat, bake, etc. All technical language that is relevant to the act of cooking. If they were to avoid using these specifics, the instructions may not be as clear, it may be harder to follow, or may just be really confusing. When you're giving instructions, clarity is key. So formal tone is always best. For example number 2, we are going to look at a set of instructions for assembling a trundle bed. Now, I believe the instructions are from America, but the principle is the same. I'm sure most of us can relate to building a flat pack piece of furniture and the frustrations that come with such an exercise. So, pause the video and familiarize yourself with these instructions, and then we will take a look at the questions. So once again, I apologize. I have given away the answer to the first question. Instructions for assembling a trundle bed. Now, structurally quite similar to our previous example of the apple pie recipe, we have essentially our list of ingredients, but in this case it's a list of equipment that you are going to need to assemble the trundle bed. And then we have our method, our list of instructions, step 1 to 6, clearly laid out, evenly spaced, and clearly numbered. We also have a graphic, not so much this time designed like the apple pie was to make it seem inviting and delicious, but to give the reader an idea of what their finished trundle bed is going to look like, and indeed how it all goes together. This is a helpful reference that's often seen in instruction manuals like this, because sometimes instructions, verbal instructions rather, aren't always clear enough, and people who are visual learners, I myself am a visual learner, find it very helpful to have a reference photo to accompany the instructions. So I've also kind of given away the ending to number 3. Do the graphics make the instructions easier or harder to follow? I believe in most cases people would find this easier, especially this specific almost zoom in here to the joins of the wood panels here, giving you very, very specific view of which screws are being used, which Allen key is being used, and how they all fit together nicely. Also noting that you need a flathead screwdriver for this. I think the graphics are particularly helpful for someone who doesn't build furniture a lot, particularly the pictures of the specific pieces of equipment, barrel nuts, different lengths of screws, the Allen key. All of these are helpful. Imagine none of the pictures were there and it was just a list of equipment with no reference in the kit you got to assemble this particular bed. I myself would personally be completely lost, and anyone else who isn't familiar with hardware could possibly find this to be a real stumbling block. Having a visual in instructions like this is often very, very useful. The last thing I'll draw your attention to is the brief nature of each instructional step. Attach the back panel to the bottom panel assembly. Then attach the front panel as in step 1. Attach the 2 end panels as in step 2. It's not messing around with long, lengthy descriptive sentences. It's saying attach part A to attach part B, attach part B to part C. These instructions are short, clear, and get straight to the point. Instructional texts aren't designed to paint a beautiful creative picture and take you on a story-like journey. They're designed to take you through a step-by-step process in a successful and swift manner. Finally, once again, the tone is very formal here. We have lots of creative language here. Allen head bolts, panel, 2 3/8 inch Allen head bolts, assembly, and more besides. All technical language relevant to the subject matter, which in this case is assembling a trundle bed. If you were to use slang or use incomplete sentences or even bad grammar, which would be all right if you were sending a text to a friend, but in this case could make the instructions less clear and could lead to mistakes. Okay, second to last, we have descriptive text, the complete opposite to our instructional predecessors. So, as the name suggests, these types of texts are what you would expect to find in perhaps travel writing, storybooks, or creative writing. Descriptive texts help the reader to paint a vivid mental picture of people, places, or things being described on the page. So our first example is a creative writing competition entry from a Year 10 student named Annabelle. So pause the video, have a read, and then we'll look at the questions. So let's start with a fun question. Can you identify your favourite descriptive sentence? My personal favourite, or part of the sentence, is the lazy summer afternoon breeze carried the last of the afternoon notes birdsong into the depths of the forest. I butchered that a little bit. Shall we try again? The lazy summer breeze carried the last notes of the afternoon birdsong into the depths of the forest. That's better. It just paints a beautiful picture where you can almost picture the breeze dancing through the trees, and the direction of the breeze takes you further into this picture of the forest. It's very, very clever writing here. Now you'll notice these sentences are unlike any that we've already encountered today. They are long, they are descriptive, they use multiple adjectives and other literary devices as well. Now, adjectives are words that describe a noun. So, thick tree trunks, single structure, weather-beaten cottage. All examples of adjectives that have been used here. Adjectives are essential to descriptive writing because they help the reader to paint a picture in their mind as they follow the story. If you like, to show you how effective adjectives are, pick a sentence from the paragraph and remove all of the adjectives and see what a difference it makes. Now, other devices we can spot here are alliteration, which is an instance of repeating sounds at the beginning of words, through thick tree trunks, slivers of dying sunlight slipped, and then also personification. Personification is an instance where an object or effect acts in a human-like way, or it's compared to a human behavior. So, for example, the lazy summer breeze carried the last notes of the afternoon bird song. Slivers of dying sunlight slipped through the tattered moth-eaten curtains. It adds an extra layer of description and complexity, helping the reader to not only picture the images in their mind, but how different elements of the story are behaving. It helps the reader to immerse themselves in the story. So, as a fun optional exercise, totally up to you, what do you think would happen next? Where is the story going? Either pause the video now, or when the lesson is completed, have a go at writing, say, the next paragraph. Don't forget to use your dictionary to find those adjectives. And if you're feeling ambitious, use a thesaurus to find some creative synonyms for some ordinary words. For example, rather than went, you could say strolled, journeyed, travelled, skipped, ambled. See what you can come up with. Okay, example number 2 of descriptive writing. we have a travel blog. So, as I said before, pause, familiarize yourself with the page, and then we'll take a look. So what is it about this travel blog that first grabs your attention? For me, it's the colourful pictures, immediately drawing my eye. 4 pictures of this travel writer in different locations around the world, all deliberately very colourful, with striking landscapes in a couple of the backgrounds. Immediately piques my curiosity and makes me wonder, oh, where's she going? What is she doing? It looks like such a good time. I wish I could have an adventure like that. Other things that you may have noticed is her logo at the top, Adventures and Sunsets, and she's got a lovely little logo here that looks like a globe, a very clever logo for a travel writer. And also her heading at the top here, hi friends, my name is Kimmy. So this is a section from her website that's at the front page, if you like, not about a specific experience, but just telling the readers about herself. So there's lots of description in the first paragraph about who she is: photographer, blogger, adventurer, nomad, solo traveler. Lots of information about the writer herself. Then if we look at paragraphs 2 and 3, they do continue to be descriptive, but also explanatory in what the reader can expect to find in this travel blog. So sometimes there is a crossover. A text can actually belong to more than one category. Here she even uses some specific language that she may have come up with herself. Insta savvy, I'm assuming referring to Instagram. Insta savvy meaning that someone who may record their travel experiences and post it on social media for other people to enjoy. This is an example of an informal tone. She's using slang. She's combining words together to make new sayings. Completely fine. And often a literary device that is employed in examples like this. This isn't a formal piece of writing. This isn't designed to be a piece of legislature, part of a rule book or an instruction manual or a speech or anything like that. Yes, this is designed to be read by many people, the general public, but it's friendly, it's warm, it's inviting. And so an impersonal tone, a less formal approach, is often employed to make it more inviting. What do we think about the pictures? Do they add to that element of looking appealing and encouraging people to look at her blog and read about her experiences? I certainly think so. It not only shows us examples of where she's been and what she does on her trips, but gives us an idea of the kind of person she is. She's clearly adventurous, she's clearly brave, especially that top right-hand picture of her sitting on top of a mountain. That makes me feel a bit wobbly. She clearly appreciates the world around her. The photography is very stunning. And she's happy in all of these pictures. So this tells us that this person's blog is going to be happy. It's going to be positive. It's going to be something that we're going to enjoy reading. Now, what is it finally about her text and her choice of words that makes the sound of travel enticing? Well, she certainly goes into detail about the different kinds of trips that she will feature in her blog. She uses the clever combination of rhyming words unique and boutique. That's very memorable. As we discussed in our limerick example, rhyming words are often memorable and will stick in people's minds. Whilst she then goes on to also say that she visits different aspects of a travel experience, such as off the beaten track, best photo ops and cute spots, budget, but also the occasional splurge, something for everybody. She's making herself universal, something for everyone. This will hopefully mean her audience grows and her writing will appeal to a larger group of people. She's trying to show that she is versatile in her approach to travel, whilst also keeping in mind different people's circumstances. These are all forms of description that help the reader to understand what they can expect when reading more of her writing, whilst also enjoying the idea of the trips that she could cover. And last but not least, we have explanatory text. So our first example is a diary entry. Please read it, pause the video if needed, and then we will look at the questions. So first things foremost, who do we think wrote this diary? Well, there's a really big clue in our second paragraph. None of my year 11 friends are going. So we know that this is written by a student likely in year 11, so 15 to 16 years old. Not too sure if it's a boy or a girl, that doesn't really matter, we know it's a teenager. We can also very clearly see when this was written. There's no year, but Sunday the 27th of June. Now, what do we think the reader is feeling? I think it's safe to say that this writer is excited. Not just by literally stating it, but their use of elongated words, underlining certain aspects of their writing, smiley faces at the end of their diary entry, and exclamation marks as well. All indicate to someone who is excited. Now, what elements of the diary entry make it personal to our writer specifically? Well, there's a mention of a person called Charlie. Again, we don't know if they're a boy or a girl, that doesn't matter. But the writer tells us how excited they are to spend a week with this person and Charlie's friends. This is personal to them. And they also go on to talk about how romantic the Eiffel Tower experience will be, perhaps something that they've been anticipating. This is something that this specific person is looking forward to and couldn't be applicable to anybody. Exactly what you'd expect to see in a diary entry. Someone's personal thoughts, feelings, and desires. Now, a thought specific to this type of text. All of the other pieces of text we've looked at this evening require a lot of planning. They were methodically thought out, structured carefully, and probably drafted several times before coming up with the final version. This, however, probably wasn't planned. As most would expect a diary entry to be, they're written in the moment, as the emotions are coming out, as the thoughts are being processed, because writing a diary is all about being in the moment and not really thinking through what you're writing. You only realize what you've written after the fact. A diary is deeply personal and often very private to the owner. So what about this text is explanatory? Well, the writer is explaining that they are going to Paris for a whole week, that they are excited to spend time with Charlie and friends, particularly up the Eiffel Tower. Now, whilst these points aren't clearly organized, it's still very easy to extract that from the text. It is an informal tone because the writer is essentially speaking to themselves, but that's okay. You wouldn't write a formal letter to yourself in a diary. And most people in a diary entry would be their truest form of themselves, which is why they may do things like elongate their words, use too many exclamation marks, or do a little doodle to accompany their thoughts from that day. So that's an informal example of an explanatory text. Now we're going to move on to a formal version. This is a scientific report, a very thorough report. So once again, for the final time, pause the video, have a read, and then we will look at the questions. So, quite a complicated text here. This report is about the presence, or whether, the presence of sodium chloride affects the germination of grass seeds. So, structurally, it's very clear. It's divided up using paragraphs and subheadings, an introduction, a method, the results, and a conclusion. Very easy to follow. A structural feature that we haven't seen yet is the feature of references here. Now, this occurs when someone is referring to a piece of information in their own writing that isn't theirs, but that research has contributed to their work. So it's safe to say that this sentence here, this germination process is sensitive to changes in extracellular sodium chloride ions, comes from a book written by someone named Cork, and the book was written in 2006. That is what that's referring to. Now, going back to our paragraphs and subheadings, do you think they are helpful in allowing us to understand the process that this scientist went through to get this set of results? I certainly think so. It's clearly set out to, first of all, explain what they intend to do and how the experiment is going to work, then the method of said experiment, then the results, and then what those results tell us. You will have also noticed that we've got a small diagram here in the form of a graph that contributes to the corresponding results of the experiment to help the reader have a visual representation of how the grass seeds germination rates went down with the higher concentration of sodium chloride concentrate. Having a visual reference in a report like this may often be very helpful, especially if you're reading this as someone who isn't a scientist, like myself. Whilst I may understand what the scientist was trying to achieve here, having the visual reference helps me to fully understand the results. So next, let's see what technical language we can spot. I can spot multiple examples here. Estimated, methods, experiment, germinated, solution. I could go on. Lots of examples here of scientifically specific language used here, as you would expect. The tone is, of course, also formal. This is designed to be published in a scientific journal or in a series of results. It's important that the experiment and the method is clearly understood, and it is purely factual. No opinion is involved here, just scientific facts. Lastly, and this is related to the references that I highlighted earlier, we have a bibliography at the bottom of our report here. Now, a bibliography references those references in the text and gives full details of the book that the scientist has used to accompany their research or back up their points of view. Now, you won't just find bibliography in a scientific context. You'll find it at the end of essays. Any kind of piece of writing that relies on information from another source, it is correct practice to feature a bibliography so that other readers can understand where you've got your information from, and indeed, should they want to read further into the subject, they've got a list of books that they can now refer to. It also avoids any accusations of plagiarism. Writing down someone else's information as your own and not giving credit can land you in trouble, usually in academic circles, such as if you were at university and writing an essay. So, as far as being an explanatory text goes, this is clearly explaining the steps this scientist took to plan, prepare, conduct, and conclude from their experiment about grass seeds. And that's it. Those are the 6 kinds of texts that you are likely to come across in your functional skills course.